Cinderella's Rats. For this is the miracle that I'd been dreaming of. This is blood. A sharp elderly voice echoed behind Cinderella as she spun around to discover who had intruded into her private chamber. Cinderella was holding her bruised left hand over the space between her upper lip and lower nose, which was oozing quite terribly with dark red blood. Cinderella had already covered the dark purple bruise on the side of her right eye with taupe foundation, but the hemorrhaging of the skin permeated through the poorly applied makeup. "What are you doing in here? No one is allowed in the queen's private chamber. Get out! Get out!" Cinderella paused only long enough for the elderly woman to notice how quickly the blood coated Cinderella's brilliantly white teeth. "It's you. It's you, fairy godmother, it's you." "Yes, my child. Sit down, my dear. Let's have a look at you. I'm sorry I yelled. I didn't recognize you with your clothes." Cinderella lifted the dark black cloak that surrounded the woman, which was in stark contrast to the beautiful light blue gown she wore last time with red ribbon. "Enough about me, dearest. What has happened to you?" The woman brushed Cinderella's hair back to reveal two deep blue bruises on the right side of her forehead. Cinderella buried her head in the woman's chest. "He's terrible. Absolutely terrible, godmother. After we got married, he started beating me. When he's stressed out, he beats me. When he gets angry, he beats me. After the death of his father, when he became king, he had so much pressure on him, so many problems with the kingdom, so he takes it out on me." Cinderella sobbed uncontrollably as the woman caressed her scalp. Now, said the old woman, rolling her eyes in disgust. "I'm the laughing stock of this castle. Everyone knows he sleeps with all of the chambermaids, every single one of them." "How terrible," the woman said with no hint of surprise in her voice. "And he shares me." The woman stopped rubbing her. Every molecule in her body stopped. "Well, surely a king must share his young queen with the whole kingdom, that the people might love and adore you and—" "No, fairy godmother. He shares me with the generals of his army. When they visit, he gives me to them." At the sound of these words, Cinderella felt the woman grow extraordinarily hot. She pulled away from her slowly, backing up into the corner. The elderly woman stood up and walked towards Cinderella, eyes glowing a steamy, fiery orange. "You're so weak. In all my days, I've never seen a woman of such power, so pathetically weak." "I'm sorry, fairy godmother. I'm sorry for—" "Yes, you are sorry, you—" The elderly woman saw that Cinderella was paralyzed with fear. She stood still and calmed down, eyes returning from a fiery orange to a brilliant blue. "Cinderella, Cinderella, do you know who I am?" "Of course. You're my fairy godmother." "Stop calling me that. That name is tired, weak, timid, and doesn't at all reflect the true nature of my power. Do you know what everyone has called me for the past 500 years? "No, what do they call you?" "Witch. They call me witch. They called your mother a witch too." "You knew my mother? How come you didn't tell me?" "She was my daughter, sweet little Elizabeth, my only child, so strong and honorable, not at all like you." Cinderella put her hand back over her mouth. "So that makes you my—" "Yes, my dear, not your godmother, your grandmother." Cinderella paused and crouched down on the floor, head in between her knees. "Why did you do this to me, grandmother? The pumpkin into a carriage, the mice into horses, the dress, the glass slippers. This is all your fault. You ungrateful little bitch. I gave you exactly what you wanted, exactly who you wanted. Did I tell you to marry a man after you only danced with him for 5 minutes? Any man who chooses a wife solely based on her beauty is bound to cheat on her. Stand up. Cinderella didn't budge. Stand up, the woman said while gritting her teeth. Cinderella stood up with her eyes still closed as the old woman yanked her hand open. You must live up to your full potential. You must rise above this shame and claim the power you were destined to acquire. You must use your gift. Cinderella opened her eyes to see a white wand glowing in her pale palm. Use your power. And with that, the elderly woman vanished into black vapor. Cinderella looked at the sundial clock, then headed toward the kitchen. 2 hours later, the king pushed the 2 broad doors open into the dining room chamber. He was followed by the 7 generals of his royal army. Cinderella! Cinderella! Get in here now! The king bellowed through the large hall as his subjects giggled close behind him. Cinderella burst into the dining room, carrying 8 huge mugs full of water. The generals took their seats at the table, which left no room for Cinderella. I'm certain that you've prepared dinner, yes? Yes, my king. I just wanted to bring you drink first so that... Just then the king took one of the large mugs off the tray, looked into its contents, and threw the glass mug onto the ground. He then took his large brown hand and smacked the tray, sending the remaining 7 mugs crashing to the floor. Water? Bring us beer. And hurry up, you ignorant peasant. The soldiers nodded in agreement. As she ran back to the kitchen, 3 other chambermaids rushed in with 8 hot plates of food. The plates steamed of hot mashed potatoes, corn, yams, and a strange-looking meat. The women placed the gold plates in front of the military generals. Cinderella re-emerged carrying 8 new mugs full to the brim with beer. She placed the drinks on the table in front of each general, then in front of the king last. When she was in arm's reach, the king put his large fingers around Cinderella's throat. What the hell is this mystery meat you have placed before me? It's groundhog, your favorite, she muttered, choking on her words. The king looked down at his plate. Then he slammed Cinderella's head into the side of the table. Does this look like groundhog to you? Cinderella could feel her warm blood spreading on the dark oak table underneath her face. His hand still firmly around her throat, she whispered, I baked it this time. That's why it's a little small, she said as she gulped small rivulets of blood. The king loosened his grip slightly, but did not release her. Eat, he commanded his generals, and they eagerly began gulping yams and mashed potatoes into their mouth. Not the trimmings, the meat. Eat the meat. The men paused, then slowly dug their forks into the soft flesh covered in gravy. The king looked at Cinderella with squinted eyes. She knew he was using the soldiers as guinea pigs to make sure that the meat was not poisoned before he ate it. She also knew that if any of them so much as coughed, she was a dead woman. The men ate all of the meat with no problem. After the king felt it was safe, he lifted Cinderella's neck from the table and thrust her small frame onto the floor. Sit there like a good little dog while your master enjoys his dinner. The king sunk his large fork into the meat, lifted it into his enormous mouth, and swallowed it whole. He immediately started on the corn when he noticed out of the corner of his eye something white and small shaking at him. Cinderella was pointing her wand directly at the king. What is that stick you carry, wench? You were right, she said as she wiped blood from the side of her face. It was not groundhog you ate. It was a rat. The king stood up and began walking toward her. He drew his sword, lifted it over his head as he quietly heard Cinderella say, "Bibbidi, bobbidi, boo." She pointed the wand directly at his stomach. He felt a bubbling, then a gurgling, then an expanding. It grew rapidly within him as he watched his stomach move violently, as if something within it was emerging. He felt his skin rip and something large push through the front of his clothing. He lifted his shirt and screamed, "It's a hoof!" shouted one of the generals. "It's a bloody hoof!" The king fell, and from his limp body slowly emerged a beautiful white horse, just as beautiful as the horse that carried her to the ball where she met her shining prince, just as beautiful as the horse her grandmother had created from a small, loving, diseased rat. Only this horse was covered in the king's blood. The generals shrieked in panic, knowing they had eaten the same meat and were probably about to share the same fate. Several of them sobbed, cried, and began to beg for their lives as they watched Cinderella walk over to the king's mangled frame, remove the crown from his head, and place it firmly on her own. One general ran over to her, bowed very humbly, and shouted, "Long live the Queen, ruler of all England!" When the remaining soldiers saw her smile at this phrase, they all ran over to her, bowed, and shouted the same enchanting phrase. "Long live the Queen! Long live the Queen! Long live the Queen! Long live Queen Cinderella!" The smile faded quickly from her face. She stared at the group of coward men. "Don't ever call me that again. That name is tired, timid, and doesn't at all reflect the true nature of my power. I shall take my mother's name. I shall henceforward and forever be called Queen Elizabeth."